We are shifting our focus to redraft fantasy football on today's episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast and going through our top 15 early quarterback rankings for the 2024 season. Welcome in Lucas Wenzel and Tyler Plath, both hanging out for you. Tyler, who is the quarterback you are most excited to talk about on today's episode?
It's the quarterback that I'm going to have the most exposure to in my best ball leagues. It's Anthony Richardson, just because the dude has got some crazy upside in what is going to be an even better offense than it was last year. So yeah, Anthony Richardson is my guy.
And I am very much looking forward to chatting to him as well. I'm looking forward to chatting Justin Herbert, though. I think the community right now is kind of blowing this whole Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman offense out of proportion here. So I'm excited to chat about Justin Herbert, Anthony Richardson, just a handful of names we're going to be talking about on today's episode. Without further ado, Ty, let's dive on into our top 15 quarterback rankings. Before we dive in, Trevor Lawrence is our quarterback 15. I'll start there, but a few guys who didn't make the cut, we're going to count down 15 to 1. Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff are tied at 16 for us. Kirk Cousins at 18, Stafford at 19, Aaron Rodgers at 20. I think it was difficult for me to keep Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins out of the top 15 specifically, mostly because I'm a believer in the Rams offense still with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. But with Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff is just home game merchant, terrible on the road. Kirk Cousins, fresh off an Achilles tear. That's where my dissonance lied with those guys. That's why I left him off the list. And frankly, with Tua, quarterback 9 finish last year, I believe. I have it up. Yep, quarterback 9 finish. Only averaged 16.7 fantasy points per game, though. Just a guy where, sure, he can have massive weeks. But I'll tell you what, as soon as the weather gets below 50 degrees, 60 degrees, you can't trust the guy.
Yeah, I originally put Jared Goff closer to my top 12 when I initially did my rankings, because I was like, Jared Goff, he's finished as a top 10 quarterback the past 2 years. But then you look at at a point per game basis, and he's closer to 15 and 16. And it's because, again, he's home game merchant. He does not perform the same on the road as he does at home. And it's really as simple as that. So you have to kind of put him right when you look at all 32 quarterbacks. The guy is right smack dab in the middle, because he is never going to consistently give you his home game, performances.
So let's dive into the top 15 then, because at 15, we do have Trevor Lawrence. And I think a lot of people, they'll look at this and they'll say, I don't know. Let's start with this. Do you think this is consensus for most people to have Trevor Lawrence at 15? I feel like some people would look at this and say, well, shouldn't he be closer to 12? And some people might say, what are we doing here? He should be closer to 20. I feel like this feels appropriate for Trevor Lawrence for a multitude of reasons. But what do you think?
I feel like 15 is just kind of like the happy medium between both parties, right? And that's typically, it's not just quarterbacks, but really all things fantasy football, where there is one extreme and there's another extreme, and things usually just play out right down the middle, right? And that's what it feels like with Trevor Lawrence, for me at least, where he's a guy that you have to keep him in the middle just because things have not gone well so far. But you can also recognize that, hey, he could finish closer to 12, closer to 10, maybe even push top 8 even if all things go right for him. So for the way that things have been just right now for Trevor Lawrence, 15 feels like the perfect spot for him.
I mean, here's the deal. We look back to 2022, the year before last. I mean, Trevor Lawrence was the quarterback 8 in that season. He was averaging 17.9 fantasy points per game, which on a points per game basis put him, I believe, as a quarterback 13 that season. But then you even look at last year, right? A little bit of a down year. Finished as a quarterback 13 overall with 17.3 fantasy points per game. But that was more than Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback 9. Baker Mayfield, quarterback 10. Sam Howell, the quarterback 12. So right there, you could already say, well, on a points per game basis, Trevor Lawrence was better than, 3 guys ahead of him inside of the top 10. Now, and then you look at, Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, who are averaging, right around 18.5 fantasy points per game. So that bumps him back down. But this is, I feel like this is appropriate for Trevor Lawrence, because yes, they go out and add Brian Thomas Jr. this offseason in the draft. They let Calvin Ridley walk, but they still have Christian Kirk Evan Ingram. They brought in Gabe Davis for another field stretcher as well. I just think this situation hasn't had enough, or the team structure hasn't had enough fluctuation to it where I'm pushing Trevor Lawrence any higher, but I'm certainly not pushing him any lower than 15.
No, I mean, yeah, the point per game basis argument is a pretty strong one in my opinion, because again, the guy, they throw the ball in Jacksonville. He was 6th in team pass plays per game. They were 2nd in pace of play last year. They were 5th in deep ball attempts last year. Like, Jacksonville likes to throw the ball. That's probably why they went out and got Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis, because they want to push the ball downfield, because they they want Trevor Lawrence throwing the ball. The only thing that's really going to cap his upside into pushing probably top 10, top 8 status is just the fact that Trevor Lawrence hasn't really like cleaned up the danger throws, right? He was 4th in danger plays last year. He was 4th in interceptable passes last year. So those kind of things are what really cap his upside. So really, maybe 15 in the grand scheme of things, right? In this top 10, top 20 debate, right down the middle. Maybe it's a little low. Maybe it should be closer to 12 or 13. But I think the other part of this is we are talking about 2 rookie quarterbacks that have a little more rushing upside than Trevor Lawrence does. And arguably, at least one of them has a better offensive situation than Trevor Lawrence does. So I think those are the prime reasons why Trevor Lawrence may be a little bit lower on people's lists this year. The guy's talented, right? And really, we are going to see who believes in Trevor Lawrence and who does not. And I would just say that, like, I don't mind Trevor Lawrence. I'm not going to be on either of those extremes.
So you brought up 2 rookie quarterbacks ahead of him. Let's move on to one of those right now, because Caleb Williams is our consensus quarterback 14 right now. Excuse me. I have him at 14. You have him at 12. I'm curious. You have top 12 optimism with Caleb Williams in year 1. Explain that to me, because I don't share the same optimism as you. Now, I get it. We're only what, 2 spots apart. So I'm not saying it's absolutely blasphemous you have him at 12, but I don't have the same optimism with Caleb Williams, and I'm tempted to put, Trevor Lawrence ahead of him. I'm tempted to, slide Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff ahead of him. I'm not as optimistic on rookie quarterbacks. That's just who I am. I think Caleb Williams will be a fine NFL player, but you have optimism for top 12 upside, and why is that?
I mean, I think the easiest way to say this is I'm going to as I pull up my rankings here, just to describe who I have at 12 and who I have at 13. There we go. So Caleb was my quarterback 12. Justin Herbert's my quarterback 13. Jayden Daniels is my 14. Trevor Lawrence, my 16. Jared Goff, my 15. It isn't necessarily the fact that it's Caleb Williams at 12, but it's really those 4 to 5 quarterbacks. I think you could place any which way. I just prefer Caleb more than those guys, just because I think the offense in Chicago will be a little more efficient, a little more productive in just being, a quarterback like Caleb Williams, who does have some sneaky rushing upside. He may not be scoring 5, 6, 7 rushing touchdowns. He may give you 3 or 4 though. And that typically makes the difference of these guys that are stuck in this 12 to 15 range. So it's not exactly like, again, it's not that like I'm way in on him compared to you, because we are 2 spots apart. But I think when we're talking about a Chicago, Washington, Chargers, Jacksonville, Detroit offense, I think Chicago is going to be towards the top of the offensive team production rather than some of the other guys, and that just benefits the quarterback position more than other positions.
I think the big thing for me is I'm just never optimistic with a rookie quarterback completion percentage, because I do think they need to make an adjustment to the pro level. The defensive backs are more talented. The pressure is more intense. Granted, you should be playing with better offensive linemen, but that's unfortunately not always the case to make a difference.
Just
the talent jump. Yeah, right. In terms of the talent jump, right? I'm just less optimistic. I do think Caleb Williams is in a better situation than Trevor Lawrence. Than, frankly, the next 2 guys we'll talk about for sure. 3 of the next 4, I would say. I'm just never as optimistic. And I think some people just expect Caleb Williams to come in, and break all these rookie records, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm so sick of seeing all the stupid graphics that have Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze as 1,000-yard wide receivers, because I would be willing to I would much rather take the odds on only one wide receiver having a 1,000-yard season than all three having a 1,000-yard season. The happy medium is probably like 2. Like Keenan Allen will probably barely scrape past 1,000. DJ Moore will, but I think Rome Odunze will be closer in like the 850, 900, kind of a Brandon Ayuk, sophomore season kind of range. Or sophomore season, I remember I believe it was going into a sophomore year. His over under was set at like 850 yards, and I said smash the over, and he didn't hit it. So I should probably retract that statement. But my thing is, I'm just less optimistic on rookie quarterbacks figuring it out right away. But Caleb Williams could be the one to, foil all my plans and pessimism on that, considering he has, excuse me, as I said, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. I'll even throw Cole Kmet in there because I'm feeling nice today. There's a chance he does it. I have him at 14, though. It just feels right in terms of figuring out the hump. And there is a mobility piece to Caleb Williams, right? The comp that we threw off for him was like a properly sized, slightly less mobile Kyler Murray, in terms of he has the creativity, he has the ability to scamper out of the pocket. I just want to see it on a Chicago Bears team that is just thirsting for their first 4,000-yard passer. Sorry for me being pessimistic about that, based on what history and the numbers have told me. I would just rather push the brakes on Caleb Williams before shoving him into top 12 status. But again, you and I aren't far off here. You're looking at this more optimistically. I'm looking at this more pessimistically. And that's all it is.
I will say this, though, too. Who's the offensive coordinator now for the Chicago Bears?
It is Shane Waldron.
It's Shane Waldron, who's coming over from Seattle, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say, like, oh, look at Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? But, like, I do think that a lot has to go right to see Caleb Williams push into top 10 status. I mean, I'm just looking at first down tendencies and just personnel lineups and stuff. The Seahawks lined up in 11 personnel with just 3 wide receivers, that at the 10th least rate last year of any offense. And yeah, we've got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze. Well, and then you look at 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. The Seahawks were 11th highest in 12 personnel. That's 2 tight ends. So again, like, for all things to go right, with each wide receiver getting their own, with Caleb Williams even, let's say pushing 4,000 yards right out of the gate, things are going to have to fall into place relatively quickly too, because that's the other thing with quarterbacks. Slow starts typically do not, end up looking the greatest at the end of the season when we're going over the season in reviews for these guys. But look, this is not slandering the talent of Caleb Williams.
No.
This is just, it's the NFL. Things are a little bit different now than they were in college.
And you go look at our dynasty quarterback rankings, which is a much better reflection of how we view the player's career as a whole. Caleb Williams is higher than 14. All right, we believe in Caleb Williams, the talent. We are just talking redraft 2024 season, this year only. And I do agree. I think a lot has to fall into place for Caleb Williams to, smash 4,000 yards right out of the gate. We just don't see that from rookie quarterbacks. We cannot make this next guy and CJ Stroud the norm. So let's move on to the next guy, Ty, the guy I'm looking forward to talking to. We have Justin Herbert and Jayden Daniels tied at our 12th best quarterback for 2024. And let's start with Justin Herbert, 12B, we'll call him. I just think we're blowing things out of proportion here with Justin Herbert. Underdog fantasy right now, Justin Herbert's going as the quarterback 16. And the narrative we're blowing out of control here is that, well, Jim Harbaugh, what did he do in college? Run the crap out of the football. Greg Roman, what did he do with the Baltimore Ravens? He ran the crap out of the football. Why are we quadruple counting this? Mm-hmm. That's what it feels like we're doing at this point. We're double counting. We knew with Justin Herbert not having any, can we even say like quintuple counting? Like with Justin Herbert not having any weapons, sure, that's a dock on Justin Herbert. With Jim Harbaugh coming from Michigan, yeah, we knew that wasn't going to be a pass-heavy offense. With Greg Roman coming from the Baltimore Ravens, sure, we knew. Let's only count it 3 times. And even though they don't have weapons, they still went out and got Ladd McConkey, who isn't, a bad asset to throw the football to. The Chargers are going to throw the ball more than 5 times per game. If they do that, like they're going to be setting NFL records for the most rush attempts in a season, the fewest passing attempts in a season. Like, let's get real here. Justin Herbert is still going to have to throw the ball 25, probably 30 times a game, depending on how well the Chargers stay in games. And you even look at Greg Roman then, when he was coaching Lamar back in Baltimore. Now, let me first preface this by saying I understand Lamar Jackson has an incredibly different rushing floor than Justin Herbert does. Lamar Jackson gains most of his value from rushing. Let me get that out of the way. But you look at Lamar Jackson's fantasy points under Greg Roman. In 2019, his MVP season, 28.1. I'm not going to say that is the outlier out of the next 3 numbers I'm going to read. But in 2020, Lamar Jackson, 22.8 fantasy points. 2021, 21.1 fantasy points per game. 2022, 20.3 fantasy points per game. Justin Herbert can give you 350, 400 on the ground in a season if he really needs to. He has that scrambling mobility, improvisation skill that, some of the other quarterbacks we'll be talking about ahead of him just don't have. So I think we're blowing things out of proportion here in Los Angeles. Justin Herbert, when I finish statting him out, I'm not going to be surprised when he does end up being a top 12 quarterback for me. And I do believe, based on our rankings, I have him as my quarterback 12 right now. And Ty, you have him as your quarterback 13.
I think the way that we need to look at this is I'm not going to sit here and say that the Chargers are going to be behind most of their games this year, but I would not be surprised if that's the case. Because you look at this offense, they will be struggling to put up points, which, yes, that'll affect Herbert in some ways, but they still are going to have to throw the ball. So there's still opportunity for him to come through. Right. And then you look at this defense for the Chargers. I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say that they're a bottom half of the league defense, because outside of Joey Bosa, outside of Derwin James, outside of Khalil Mack, I'm just going to say it like this. Let's not pretend that Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are like what they were 4 years ago, right? So this defense their defense will be decent, but they're not going to shut down anybody, right? So it's the Chargers, I think, could surprise a lot of people. Gus Edwards can probably get 13, 14, 15 carries a game. Herbert's still going to have to throw the ball 30 times, though, just because either they're not putting up enough points or the defense isn't stopping the opponent from scoring points. So plenty of opportunity, I think, for Herbert to get some yards. And let's not pretend either. Herbert is a sneaky athlete, too. I'm just going to say that. He may find himself in the end zone a couple times because he takes it himself. So I don't agree with, again, quarterback 17, quarterback 16 is a very popular spot for Herbert these days. That's way too low for the talent that is Justin Herbert.
Let's talk about a 12A then. And I think, let me check our rankings. You and I both have, you actually have Jayden Daniels 1 spot behind Justin Herbert. I have him 2 spots ahead, or 1 spot ahead of Justin Herbert, excuse me. I have my quarterback 11. You have my quarterback 14. Here's my deal with Jayden Daniels. I love the rushing upside. This could go south very quickly if he doesn't know how to protect himself. This could also go south very quickly if his arm talent doesn't translate to the NFL. I don't want to miss out on the next Anthony Richardson, though. And I understand. Anthony Richardson's only played 4 games. 3 of them he had 20 plus fantasy points. He's well on his way to another one with 20 plus. I don't want to miss out on that, because these Konami code quarterbacks they just absolutely break fantasy football. And we all know that's Jayden Daniels' trump card. It's his mobility, rushing ability, creativity, scramble for yards. I don't want to miss out on that. And you give me that kind of upside, I find very little reason to believe if Jayden Daniels gives you, 700 yards on the ground during the season, that he doesn't find his way into the top 12 quarterbacks this year. What keeps him outside of the top 12 for you? Because I'm honestly kind of surprised that you have him lower than a Herbert at 14.
I think Jayden Daniels is going to struggle more as a passer, which, when you think about it, it's fantasy football. You get more points for rushing. So maybe Jayden Daniels, I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say that Jayden Daniels has probably more rushing upside than Caleb Williams for this year.
Oh, yeah. No question.
There is something just about going to Washington for me compared to a Justin Herbert playing in the chart in LA, which maybe it cancels out even just because I don't think I don't think either are like super great landing spots versus Caleb Williams going to Chicago. Like I feel like there's just a few more things working against Jayden Daniels going to Washington than some of the other guys that we've talked about already. Maybe I'm counting too much for the possibility that Jayden Daniels could miss a couple of games this year because he's either, taking huge hits because he's running out of the pocket so much, or freak injuries, stuff like that. Maybe I'm counting too much of that into that ranking. I'm not as optimistic about how good it can be as an offense for Jayden Daniels. And again, we've seen mobile quarterbacks kind of defy that logic. Anthony Richardson. Now we'll get there in a second with Anthony Richardson, but something doesn't sit right with me putting Jayden Daniels ahead of the other guys.
So Anthony Richardson last season throwing to Michael Pittman Jr., a rookie Josh Downs, a cardio king in Alec Pierce, and a hodgepodge tight end room of your boy Mo Alley Cox and who's the other gigantor tight end they got there? Jelani Woods. Thank you. I'm like, all I thought of was Branch, and I'm like, Deion Branch is not even close to the right name.
Oof, does.
Jelani Woods. So he's thrown to that wide receiver room, 59.5% completion percentage last year in basically 4 full games. Jayden Daniels throwing to Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Zach Ertz. I'll say Zach Ertz, not Ben Sinnott, despite my love for him. And Luke McCaffrey, rookie Luke McCaffrey is their wide receiver 3. Is there enough gap in those wide receiver rooms for us to be all that concerned? That's my deal. Because if Jayden Daniels throws, let's say 58 completion percentage, but he gets it done on the ground, like Anthony Richardson had 3 games of 20 plus. Like and that comes with rushing touchdowns, right? And I understand. I'm not going to hype up Brian Robinson Jr. I'm not going to say Austin Eckler's a goal line back. I just think there's a reality with Jayden Daniels that when I finish statting these guys out, I'm not going to be surprised to see Jayden Daniels probably higher than I want him to be as a rookie. But I just don't think it matters for him as a passer because I'm not banking on him being an accurate passer. I'm banking on him being a phenomenal rusher.
Sure. And maybe the other part of this too, it's going from Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas in a very quarterback friendly offense to Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson with Cliff Kingsbury and an offensive line that I just don't fully trust at all. Right. Like, so yeah, like the rushing production can really, it can fix up a lot of holes in the rest of your game, and that can turn into fantasy points. But I think there's a reality where, again, you're not getting enough passing production. So maybe, we're talking 20, whatever it was for Anthony Richardson. Maybe it's like 17, 18, because Jayden Daniels is either handing the ball off so much or running it himself so much that he's, how do I say this right? There's a reason why Terry McLaurin is going outside the top 30 wide receivers. Jahan Dotson outside of the top 50, right? Like, again, I get the rushing upside. It's there. It's 1000% there. It's just probably not something that I'm going to want to invest in heavily this fantasy year.
We'll agree to disagree on that
Sure.
because I think I was saying the same things about Anthony Richardson, and lo and behold, here he comes. And granted, Shane Steichen can play a part of that too. We can argue this for hours, but we got to keep it moving, Ty. Quarterback 11 is Brock Purdy out of San Francisco. Phenomenal year last year, all right? Brock Purdy, he was the quarterback 6 overall. He was averaging 19.2 fantasy points per game in an incredibly efficient San Francisco 49ers offense. People will say, Brock Purdy, why is he not top 10? I say regression. That is quite literally all it is for Brock Purdy here. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of the efficiency of 308 completions for nearly 4,300 yards. Out of the top 10 quarterbacks of last year, he was averaging 9.6 yards per attempt. The second highest was 8.2 from CJ Stroud. All right, we are talking nearly 1.5 yards more than the second place quarterback. Most in the top 10 were averaging right around 7.5. So he's getting nearly 2 yards more per completion. And that just adds up for a quarterback. And I just don't think we're going to get that same repeat efficiency. You also look at the touchdowns, 31 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. Purdy threw the third most touchdowns in the league last year. It's just regression. That's all I think this is. It's nothing against Brock Purdy, and what he's been able to prove throughout his career thus far. This is just regression. I don't think he hits that mark again this year. And I think, again, there's other guys who I think are looking to take a step forward and bring Brock Purdy down, mixed with this regression I think we're going to see. That's all this is. It's just banking and mixing in regression, and this is where he falls for me. That's all this is.
So I'm how much regression do you think we see then? Because we are talking about the guy that finished as the quarterback 6 last year. And
Correct.
yes, like 9.6 yards per attempt is pretty big, right? Like 8.2 is noteworthy.
Right. For CJ Stroud, a rookie.
Right.
9.6 is like it doesn't sound like a lot, but I don't think people most quarterbacks should not be averaging 9.6 yards per attempt. The best of the best haven't been averaging 9.6 per attempt.
The average is like somewhere between 6.6 and 7.2. That's the average. So I do agree to a certain extent of the regression talk, because it happens to anyone and everyone. I don't think it's that drastic of a fall off, though, and we're splitting hairs because he's my quarterback 11, your quarterback 13. So yes, there's going to be some regression that I predict, but I don't think it's going to push him outside of the top 12 quarterbacks, because I mean, the next 3 guys that we're talking about are actually kind of like very similar players in the sense that like good offenses that are just kind of playing point guard a little bit and are going to benefit off of their guys making plays for them.
So I do think we're entering basically quarterbacks 12 through, I would say, 8 in our rankings. You can honestly probably have them in any order you want to, and I'll say 13. You throw Justin Herbert in there, throw him and Jayden Daniels in. 13 through 8. I think you can honestly have these guys in any order, and I'm not going to really argue with you too much on it.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I get it. I get it why people want to say optimistic with Brock Purdy. I do. I really, really do. But, okay, Ty, we're going to play a game. We're going to play your favorite game in the world. Brock Purdy last year, okay? 19.2 fantasy points per game was a quarterback 8. Guys who finished behind him in fantasy points per game. Do you think Brock Purdy will have more or less fantasy points per game than Kyler Murray this year?
More points per game?
Yes. Sorry, my wife just poked her head in. I had to say bye. She was going to work.
The host got distracted. Less.
CJ Stroud.
It's the same.
You think they'll average the same?
Around the same. I'm not saying it's not going to be exactly the same.
You better fix your rankings on my guy.
you have a better chance of winning the lottery than CJ Stroud and Brock Purdy finishing with the exact same fantasy points per game.
Well, yes. I think CJ Stroud averages more fantasy points per game this year. Brock Purdy or Justin Herbert, who averages more fantasy points per game?
Purdy.
I lean Purdy on that one. Brock Purdy or Patrick Mahomes?
Mahomes.
Brock Purdy or your guy, Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, Richardson.
So there we already named at least 3 guys who will likely average more fantasy points per game in our eyes than Brock Purdy after he finished as the quarterback 8 last year with 19.2 fantasy points per game. Okay. All I'm saying is that it's like a 1.5 less. That's all I'm saying. Brock Purdy throws 5 less touchdowns this year. He still throws 26 touchdowns. Brock Purdy throws for 200 less yards, right? That's 20 fantasy points right there. That's all I'm going off of here. I'm not saying Brock Purdy is going to fall off a cliff. I just think other guys, between guys stepping up and Brock Purdy taking a regression step back, this is just where he falls for me. Again, we're splitting hairs between quarterback 13 and quarterback 11 at the end of the day.
I think the argument is much more plausible than I think people are going to give it the attention that it deserves.
Sure.
They're immediately going to hear it and just go, look, no, there's no way. There is a way. There's
always a way in fantasy football. There's
Yeah.
always a way. Let's take a break there, Ty. We'll be back with our top 10 redraft quarterbacks after the break. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back and we have cranked through quarterbacks 15, 14, 13, 12, and 11. Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert, Jayden Daniels, Brock Purdy. Ty, let's move it on to our quarterback 10 now, and that is Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. We both have him at quarterback 10. We are in lockstep here. My biggest worry with Jordan Love is that he's working with the same group of pass catchers this year, and I don't think they have what it takes for him to take the next step to be an elite level fantasy quarterback. I mean, we're not going to shrug off what he did last year, obviously, right? Finished as the quarterback 5, finished with 19.4 fantasy points per game, which was the quarterback the quarterback 6 last year. So maybe the better question is, are we too low on Jordan Love as our quarterback 10?
I've wondered that same question, and I lean towards no, because I do think that the stretch that he was on last year, where he threw 18 touchdowns to just 1 interception over the last 7 weeks of the season, I think.
I'll fact check you.
That is hyper efficiency. And to the point that you made about, yeah, you've got good weapons to throw to, like Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs. They're good options to have, but you don't have a Stephon Diggs. You don't have an AJ Brown. You don't have a Stephon Diggs that you went out and acquired in the offseason to help Jordan Love out, right? So there's not like an elite alpha 1 in this offense. Is there a way that he can continue to make that work and have that kind of same efficiency as he did at the end of last season? Sure.
100%.
I think it's just a little less likely than him. I'm not going to say that it's going to be the turnovers that push him down, but again, it's the efficiency that he was working at. So quarterback 5 on the year. That was also because like he had 2 top 10 finishes at the beginning of the year because he had some rushing touchdowns mixed in with his passing work. So I think again, we had described this like Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, and the next 2 guys that we're going to talk about as this tier of like they're not going to offer you much. They're not going to offer you the same kind of upside that you want in a guy like Anthony Richardson and a Kyler Murray, but they're in good offenses that are going to be efficient and produce, yards and points that benefits them in the long run.
Just doing a quick count. Jordan Love scored at least 19 fantasy points in exactly 50% of his games last year, which is a pretty good mark to hit. And you also were correct. It was 18 touchdowns to 1 interception over the final 8 weeks of the season. And I just don't think that holds up. That's just the reality. Jordan, the second most touchdowns last year, 32 touchdowns in the league. Or 32 touchdowns last year, second most in the league. I don't like talking about guys regressing. Do I think Jordan Love can throw 30 touchdowns again this year? Sure. I just don't think we can just bank on guys repeating 30 plus every single season when some of the best guys in the league last year, Patrick Mahomes only threw 27, Lamar Jackson 24, Matthew Stafford 24, Jalen Hurts only had 23. I mean, I just don't think we can make 30 a normal number for quarterbacks anymore. I don't, unless if you're elite of the elite. And Josh Allen, he had 30. No, where was Josh Allen? Josh Allen had 29 last year, right? Those are the guys I kind of expect to hover around 30. But I don't think we can just expect that for every single quarterback. And I don't know if Jordan Love is that guy going forward.
I mean, just extrapolating those 8 weeks over an entire season, that's 38, 39 touchdowns.
I just don't think that's repeatable.
That's the only quarterback that could ever make that happen would be a Patrick Mahomes, because we've seen that before. And if we're going to say that Jordan Love does that again, we're putting him into that echelon of quarterback. And I'm not ready to go that far just yet.
That makes me uncomfy. Let's instead talk about 2 guys who maybe have put themselves in that tier for fantasy football in years past. Well, I guess Joe Burrow really hasn't, but Dak Prescott last year, he finished as the quarterback 3, 36 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, 20.7 fantasy points per game. You and I have him and Joe Burrow 1 spot apart. So I have him, Joe Burrow is my quarterback 9. You have him at 8. I have Dak at 8. You have him at 9. Give me the argument for Joe Burrow over Dak. I'll give the Dak over Joe Burrow. And again, we're splitting hairs. We're 1 spot apart here, but just give me a thought process as to why you ranked Burrow ahead of Dak, and I'll inverse that.
So let me start with Dak. I think Dak is a prime regression candidate this year.
Totally.
That being said, though, having seen a year of what this offense is like post Kellen Moore, there is still some intrigue for Dak Prescott. But for me, why I go with Joe Burrow ahead of Dak Prescott is because we are talking about a guy that is throwing to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in a system that we have seen for 3 years now that is very comfortable with letting Joe Burrow cook in the pocket, right? This past year, not the most ideal. He is coming back from that wrist injury where we really have no idea how that's going to affect him this year. So there is, I think, a little bit more murkiness that comes with a Joe Burrow than a Dak Prescott. The fact is that Joe Burrow, when he's been healthy, has finished inside the top 7 before. Like, we do need to acknowledge that Joe Burrow does work at a crazy efficient rate at times. And if he's healthy with the offensive line that they now have in front of him, in the same weapons, same play caller, I think Joe Burrow's path to that top 7 that top 7 finish is a lot. I would say it's more likely than Dak Prescott, just because of the things that I value when I look at quarterback situations.
So we're going to be stuck in a Justin Herbert, Jayden Daniels kind of lock here, because I think the wrist is what concerns me with Joe Burrow.
Sure.
Is his wrist. I was watching the Pat McAfee show. What was that, Friday? I was watching that Friday morning, and AJ Hawk came on. Joe Burrow's wrist injury is not a quarterback injury. It is a linebacker, defensive end injury where no quarterback has had to work through. What does it look like to actually like torque and flick my wrist throwing the football when coming back from this? Most defensive linemen and edge rushers just got to put your hands into the guy's chest and push him around. Joe Burrow is like, when you're throwing the football, it's a lot of torque, a lot of motion on the wrist. So I am concerned about that, because the success rate on these kind of injuries, for a normal quarterback wrist injury, success rate of the surgery is right around 95% most of the time. And AJ Hawk was saying, like, for this one, it's closer to 75%, which is still better, obviously, than 50-50. Don't get me wrong. And Joe Burrow could be totally fine. But he's already come out and said, there's good days and there's bad days throwing the football with this thing. So I think I'm just more cautious on the Joe Burrow injury. That being said, if he is perfectly healthy, I totally agree with you that he has top 7 upside. I did have him in my top 7 originally before shifting some of my rankings around. The thing with Dak, I agree, he's a regression candidate. No doubt about it. Do I think he finishes top 5 again this year? I don't. But what has Dallas done to convince you otherwise, that they're not going to just keep feeding the ball to CeeDee Lamb this year? They didn't go out and draft a running back. They didn't get aggressive and take a Jonathan Brooks. They didn't get aggressive and take a Trey Benson. Heck, they didn't even get aggressive and take a Marshawn Lloyd, a Jalen Wright. They didn't take any running back. They instead went back to what they know, which is Ezekiel Elliott, who is a shell of himself, of his prime days with the Cowboys. So this is one where I'm just going to bank on what I saw with the Dallas Cowboys last year, what their offseason moves have told me. And their offseason moves have told me, let's feed CeeDee. Let's keep this game flowing through Dak and CeeDee Lamb. Do I think he goes 32-9 this year? I don't. That number is probably going to be closer to like 28-13, if I'm being perfectly honest. But that's, again, if Dak is hovering around 30 touchdowns, I think he's got a great chance of finishing inside for sure the top 10 this year. And I think he could be knocking on the door of top 5 if the chips fall right for him again this year. And he doesn't have a catastrophic collapse of falling victim to just bad interceptions like he did in 2022. Let's move on to our quarterback 7, Ty. We'll keep it moving. Kyler Murray comes in here. I think you and I both agree, in comparison to a Joe Burrow, a Dak Prescott, a Jordan Love, a Brock Purdy, what we get with Kyler Murray is year 2 post ACL with elite level mobility. A guy who will scamper out of the pocket. A guy who added Marvin Harrison Jr. in the draft. A guy who has Trey McBride in a safety blanket. A guy who has never finished lower than the quarterback 10 in fantasy points per game throughout his career. Year 2 post ACL, I'm back in on Kyler and his rushing upside.
I mean, that question of like, how would the ACL injury affect his rushing production and upside got put to bed within like the first 2 weeks. And by the end of the season, Kyler Murray had 44 rushing attempts. And if you look at like his career or his like season totals in rushing, 93 attempts, 133 rushing attempts, 88 rushing attempts, 67 in 2022 when he got the ACL injury. He was on pace for 93 rushing attempts that year. The guy runs the ball. That's a part of their offense.
He scoots.
So again, it was put to bed last year. So there should be zero question marks, zero issues going into this year about the knee injury. And if you hear from anybody, stop listening to them, because again, it was put to bed within the first 3 games when he came back last season.
Can we move on? I don't feel like we need to overcomplicate this one, because Kyler Murray is going to have to throw the football. Again, this Cardinals team will be good enough to stay in games, but not good enough to abandon the pass. I'm trying to remember who I brought this up with. Was it in what video was it? It was one that I remember using that exact same line recently. That I'm just not
wide
concerned
receiver
about.
Video.
Is that what it was? It probably was.
Marvin Harrison. Were you talking about Marv?
Yes, I was talking about Marv. I'm like, I swear it was the exact same team. Yeah. again, the Cardinals are going to be good where they stay in games. They're not going to be bad enough, though, to be, they're not going to be good enough to absolutely destroy another team and abandon Kyler Murray in the passing attack. So Kyler's going to have to throw. He's going to have to scoot. It's the perfect storm of what we want in fantasy football quarterbacks. We don't need a pure pocket passer like this next quarterback we're going to talk about. We don't need a pure high rushing upside threat like we'll talk about in 2 quarterbacks from now. Kyler Murray is like the perfect blend of everything we want in a fantasy quarterback, and I just don't think we have to overcomplicate this one with the floor that he has. So let's move on then, Ty. Let's wrap it out strong here. Move on to CJ Stroud, who is our quarterback 6. You and I are in lockstep. We both have him at quarterback 6. Are we jumping the gun too early on CJ Stroud, though?
It feels like it. It feels like it. And that's coming from the guy that has CJ Stroud in one of our dynasty leagues that benefited from CJ Stroud falling to me in the 3rd round of the rookie draft. Just when you look at the entire season, if you look at the season in its entirety, it paints a very different picture than I think where the assumed upside and value or the assumed jump will take place. I think they're 2 very different things in my opinion.
What I'm worried about for CJ Stroud is you look at his touchdown interception ratio, 23 touchdowns to 5 picks. I'm worried he throws double-digit picks this year. I don't think it's going to be forever that CJ Stroud doesn't throw double-digit picks. I don't think he can have, an Aaron Rodgers light season. When A-Rod was, throwing 30 plus touchdowns and, 6, 7 interceptions in a given year, right? Like that's what we're writing CJ Stroud to be if he's going to be the quarterback 6 this year. That he's going to throw 32 touchdowns and he'll throw 8 interceptions, 9 interceptions this year. Could he throw 8, 9 interceptions only? Sure, of course. But I also think this is dependent on him throwing, again, 30 plus touchdowns this year. But again, is that possible now that you have Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon? Like CJ Stroud has had everything handed to him. He's done everything right thus far. This does feel like a jump we should be able to predict. Just worried he doesn't land it. He lands on the moon and doesn't land in the stars, if that makes sense. He leaps for the stars, but he lands on the moon, which isn't a bad consolation prize. You still got Purdy freaking high, right? But like, I'm worried we're shoving CJ Stroud too high up the board, and he'll be going earlier in drafts than I'll ever want to take him, just because we see the talent. We know the talent is there. We know he'll be good, but does it translate to fantasy football when, again, you look at his rushing attempts last year, only 39 rushing attempts last year. Not ideal for a guy, that we're shoving into the top 6. We're expecting him, again, to have a Patrick Mahomes-esque level season is almost what we're kind of expecting from the guy.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Flacco last year in his 5 games was averaging 21.5 points a game. And that was top 3 in points per game over the course of the season. We were asking CJ Stroud to get 3 more fantasy points per game, basically, with where he's going in redraft, or where he probably will go in redraft.
2 for sure. It needs to be 2 more for sure.
Right. And for a guy that, look, yeah, like you said, you've got Stephon Diggs, you've got Joe Mixon now in the backfield. It's still asking a lot of a guy that just sits in the pocket, right? And so there's got to be a lot of big plays, and that's kind of what Houston has like built their offense on.
Yep.
So is there a way? Yes.
Surely.
I just he's going to be going ahead of guys like Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray, and I would smash the table every single time for either one of those 2 guys instead of CJ Stroud because of what they offer me.
And purely based on value of where you're going to be able to draft those guys too. Let's move on. You brought up Anthony Richardson. Let's talk about him because I think we're almost talking about the inverse of CJ Stroud, right? A guy who we're almost scared to watch throw the football now. I shouldn't say scared. A guy that we're like, all right, can the passing improve from 59.5 completion percentage? Sure. He's also coming off a ridiculous shoulder injury too. You're not worried about that as much, though, because you saw the rushing upside last year, albeit without Jonathan Taylor. So this is another one where I love the upside of Anthony Richardson. I think he will be an elite fantasy quarterback this year. There's also plenty of uncertainty here, though, considering we have a sample size of what? 4, 5 games, and all of them without Jonathan Taylor? How is this puzzle going to be pieced together, and how reliable is Anthony Richardson going to be, as a top 5 quarterback in our rankings this year? I mean, we both have him at 5, so we're both optimistic, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here because the sample size isn't there. And, we talked about Kyler Murray having the ideal blend of rushing ability and passing ability. For Anthony Richardson, it almost just feels like, whatever, give me a running back at the quarterback position and watch me go to work.
He had, what was it, 7 scrambles last year of his 18 statted rushing attempts. The rushing up, his rushing prowess, I'll call it, is part of his game. It's not going away. So the question that you ask yourself is, right, is the shoulder going to be okay? And to be honest, I don't really care. I don't really care, because when he is as productive and efficient as he is, when he's running the ball, literally in 3 games, I'm not including the Tennessee game where he got hurt. 1 rushing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. He had 4 in 3 games. Like that's now the thing that does need to be at least mentioned is that he will now have a full season of Jonathan Taylor in his backfield.
Yeah.
So will his number be called upon as much as it was last year, right? Because when he did play, he did have Zach Moss and he had Deion Jackson. If I'm remembering correctly, it was those 2 guys.
Deion Jackson, Zach Moss, good pull.
So that should complicate things just a little bit, but to fully take away any rushing, plays, calls, decisions, whatever it is, whatever word you want to use, taking any and all of that away from Anthony Richardson kind of goes against the talent and player that Anthony Richardson is. So it doesn't make sense to use the argument of oh, he's going to regress in the rushing game. I don't see that, because he is, like you said, he's a running back at the quarterback position. So I think a lot of people, I won't be surprised when people have a lot more question marks on Anthony Richardson, where you could see a lot of people saying Anthony Richardson is such a reach this year with his question marks in situation and stuff like that. Personally, I just don't care.
I'm trying to find a good example of a guy can we expect this kind of a season from Anthony Richardson this year? And I think I think it's 2021 Jalen Hurts. Is that who I'm after? I'm trying to decide. Look, see, he was a quarterback 9. He was averaging 21.4 fantasy points per game. So here we go. Jalen Hurts was the quarterback 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in fantasy points per game, 265, 432 for just over 3,100 yards. Only 16 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions, but 139 rushing attempts, 784 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Can we get anything like that out of Anthony Richardson? Because I think that's what we're banking on if we're going to give him top 5. Because Jalen Hurts with the quarterback 6 in that scenario with 21.4 fantasy points. And I think, to be clear, I think Anthony Richardson throws more than 16 touchdowns this year.
I think I would even dare to say we could see a 2019 Josh Allen season.
There we go, Lamar Jackson.
No.
Watch Anthony Richardson put up MVP numbers here off of injury. That's also a good one. I think that was the other one I was looking for.
Yeah, where it's 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, 500 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, that's a better one, I would say.
And that was also a quarterback 6 finish.
Yeah. So I think that is what you're looking at with Anthony Richardson. Somewhere between 17 to 21 touchdowns, probably. I would guess somewhere between 500 to 600 rushing yards. Throw in 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns. And I think you're looking at a top 5 finish from Anthony Richardson. Let's keep it moving, Ty. These final 4, I don't think we need to spend much time debating over, because Patrick Mahomes comes in at number 4 for us. I could ask the question of, is this too low? I don't think it is, because our top 3 guys are all players who have more mobility and upside in Mahomes. And I just think the days of Mahomes throwing 40 touchdowns, right? You look at him 2020, 38 touchdowns. You look at him in 2021, 37 touchdowns. 2022, obviously 41 touchdowns. I just don't think we're going to get that, especially with Rashee Rice potentially absent how many games this year, with Travis Kelce, starting to age out of the league a little bit. I should say age out of the league, with Travis Kelce starting to decline in production. That's the nicer way of putting it. You get Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, speedster, niche player, just going on the outside. Is there a way? Sure, because we've obviously seen it. For 3 years in a row, we saw it. I just think those days are behind us, and I don't think that's what we can set the expectation to be for Patrick Mahomes this year. And even if he does, with not as much rushing upside as the top 3, he might still finish, as the quarterback 3 or 4. Because outside of 2022, Mahomes was the quarterback 4 when he threw for 37 touchdowns. He was the quarterback 4 when he threw for 38 touchdowns. I don't think this is all that unreasonable. I don't think we can just chalk Mahomes up to being a top 3 lock every year. I'm okay with him being at 4, and that's where he's probably going to end up when I finish statting out all of our players.
I really wouldn't be surprised if I have Anthony Richardson as my quarterback 4. And
Mahomes is 5 or 6.
Yeah. Like Stroud and Mahomes, that are going to be not similar, but just the fact that they're going to be like ton of yards.
Yep.
Some touch, I won't say a lot of touchdowns, because I like you said, I don't think we see 38, 37 or 41 touchdowns. But if we see 32, 33, that's certainly going to put him in that 5 to 6 range. Totally.
I don't think he's lower than 5 or 6.
No.
I think you're getting too crazy then at that point. But like, my argument is, people just want to keep drafting him as this top 3 option. And I don't want to play that game. Give me the value on Anthony Richardson. Give me the value on Kyler Murray. I'll fill up my team elsewhere to make up for, if Patrick Mahomes throws 41 touchdowns this year, great job, guy. Great job. But like, I'm not banking on that, because you can't bank on that. You can't bank on the upper echelon seasons. You got to bank closer to what the average outcome will likely be for the player. And for Mahomes, I do think it's closer to that, 32, 33 touchdown range. Lamar Jackson comes in at number 3. Would we take him over Mahomes because of the rushing upside? Is that what this is?
Yep. I mean, everything goes through Lamar. And yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry now being in Baltimore might complicate things just a little bit, but this offense is going to go through Lamar. Like
quarterback 4 in 16 games last year, 21.1 fantasy points per game.
Again, the offense will go through Lamar. It will not go through Derrick Henry. I think a lot of people just hear the name Derrick Henry and they're like, whoa, like we've seen so many good years from Derrick Henry. This is not Tennessee. This is not Mike Vrabel. This is Baltimore Ravens football with what's his name? Todd Monken as your offensive coordinator, who turned Lamar Jackson into more than just a runner. He turned him into a legit passer that you need to account for now in game plans and stuff like that.
Derrick Henry is Versace Gus Edwards, okay? Like you're gonna get the touchdowns. You're gonna get the touchdowns. You just get more in between the 20s, right? You get more out of Derrick Henry in between the 20s than you do Gus Edwards. So
people are gonna hate that.
Hate me for calling Derrick. You disagree with me. I couldn't use a car analogy, because you could be like, oh yeah, he's more of like a Tesla Gus Edwards, but like that doesn't make sense because it doesn't hit the same. They don't go any faster. But like, you think of these luxury brands that very high quality, they just cost more than what you could actually get for the guy, but in reality they're the same functionality. So Versace, he's Versace Gus Edwards, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that in terms of like that's what you're going to get from Derrick Henry. All right, Ty, let's wrap it out. Last two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. I don't care which way you have these two. We have them flipped. I have Jalen Hurts at 1. You have Josh Allen at 1. At the end of the day, these are the top two dynasty quarterbacks in my book. But these are the two quarterbacks you absolutely want, absolutely top of the food chain in redraft leagues this year. They have the passing, they have the rushing upside. That they have the whole package of what you want out of an elite fantasy quarterback.
Yep. I do think like both of these guys are going to take a hit in their production because of different things. Like Josh Allen does not have a Stephon Diggs anymore, but he is still Josh Allen. He still makes plays out of nothing. Jalen Hurts may take a hit a bit in the rushing production because Jason Kelce isn't there. So maybe tush push isn't as successful as it used to be. Just throwing that out there. And you also have Saquon Barkley, who is more than capable of taking those goal line carries and converting them into touchdowns. So both of these guys still have a piece of their game that could take a hit, but they are still like the elite of the elites when it comes to quarterbacks in fantasy football.
Yeah, you could poke holes in either of their games. I don't disagree with that. I think at the end of the day, it's a pick 'em for you. I think both are going to be, again, 1 and 2 respectively. I shouldn't say respectively, 1 or 2 in whatever order you want to put them this year. They are the two guys who are cream of the crop. Well, there you go. There you have it. Our early redraft quarterback rankings are in the books. We will be back in June with our fully statted out quarterback rankings of all 32 teams that will be released in our draft guide on June 1st. So keep your eyes out for that. We'll have more promo for that in the coming weeks. We will be releasing that to you all for a smooth $10, or if you sign up with the code fellas on Underdog Fantasy when that releases and enter into any of their contests, we will give it to you for absolutely free. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But until then, we'll be back with our running back rankings, wide receiver rankings, tight end rankings, everything of the sorts. We got a lot of fun coming up on the next 3 episodes of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. So thanks for tuning in. I'm at Lucas Wenzel on Twitter, at Tyler_Plath for Tyler, FF Fellas for the main page on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. Turn on those notifications so you know when the next episode is out. And we will see you all next time. Deuces.
Deuces.